Okay, hi. I want to talk very briefly about poetry, as usual, and a particular form of poetry. That is to say, I want to talk to you about the sonnet form. You've possibly come across this before, almost certainly, in fact, but we should lay it out because there are two of them in the IGCSE anthology, and more importantly, it's, I'd say, the only form of poem that it would really value, you would really get value out of being able to recognize. First things first, the sonnet is probably the most uh, important form to recognize in European poetry. It's really ancient. The word sonnet comes from sonetto, it's Italian, it means little song. And that gives us some idea of the roots of this form because it isn't originally in English. The earliest forms of sonnet are referred to as Italian sonnets or Petrarchan sonnets, named after Petrarch, the Italian poet who wrote a lot of them. But his style and form of poetry was incredibly popular, and you found it all over Europe and all over England from around the 12th, 13th century. He was writing around the same time, I think, as Dante. So we're talking old stuff, pre Chaucer. And what do you need to know about it? Well, the sonnet form is the most important thing is that it's 14 lines long. In older forms, not always older poems, but in older forms, the Petrarchan or Italian sonnet, that sonnet takes 14 lines, of which the first 8 are one unit, known as the octave, and the next 6 are another unit, known as the sestet. And the most important point in an Italian or Petrarchan sonnet is that line 8 to 9, that point there. Between those two units, the octave and the sestet, is a volta or turn. It is the moment of change or development in the poem. It's where you look to see the purpose of the verse. Really, you're going to get 8 lines laying one thing out, and then you're going to get 6 lines, which is going to change your idea of it slightly. It's going to move to a different perspective, or the argument is going to develop, or there's going to be more information that comes in, something like that. And we'll see how that works in looking at a English poem in a moment that takes that form. The other thing for you to know about the sonnet form, though, is that it was the preferred sort of poetic form in sort of early modern English and modern English poetry. Specifically, then, the reason to know about it is that it was the preferred form of one William Shakespeare. Shakespeare, who you are hopefully getting to know, was a man of many, many qualities and virtues, but he was not humble. Far from it. Shakespeare, in fact, was probably massively egotistical, with some good cause. You know, the man clearly knew his stuff, but nonetheless, as we'll see as we read some of his work, he was very proud of himself and knew his own worth, shall we say. The reason I bring this up is because after 500 years of people writing the sonnet in the form that Petrarch laid out, Shakespeare had a look at it and went, nah, I can do better than that. And I'd say did. Because after Shakespeare, we then have the other sonnet form known as the Shakespearean sonnet. So Petrarchan up to Shakespeare's point, Shakespearean after that. Not to say that everybody changed, but you'll see that as we move forward. The Shakespearean sonnet differs from the Petrarchan sonnet in that instead of having an octave and a sestet to make up its 14 lines, it has 3 quatrains and a couplet. So that is to say, there are 3 4-line units of verse, followed by 1 pair of lines, a couplet at the end. So instead of having 1 volta, 1 moment of development or change, as you find in the Petrarchan or Italian sonnet, you have 3. After the first quatrain, after the second quatrain, and then after the third quatrain, before the couplet. Of those, the third is the most important. That turn, that volta that comes after the third quatrain and before the couplet is the point at which things change in a Shakespearean sonnet. Put simply, he reinvents the structure so that there is a coda or a postscript. Those last 2 lines, those rhyming couplet that follows the 3 quatrains, usually comment on the poem that has gone before, as we'll see when we look at a couple now. How do you identify these things? Well, you do it through rhyme. So bear with me a second. This is Remember by Christina Rossetti. It is one of the latest of the poems that we would consider early poems in this anthology. It's late 19th century, and like, say, If by Kipling, there's not a great deal here that we're going to find challenging in the language, because it's, 120, 130 years ago is, linguistically speaking, not very long. But what's interesting about this, I hope you can see, is that it is a Petrarchan sonnet. If we look at the rhyme scheme here, it's quite complicated, but it's easily enough broken up at line 8. So, remember me when I am gone away, gone far away into the silent land, when you can no more hold me by the hand, nor I half turn to go, yet turning stay. Remember me when no more day by day you tell me of our future that you planned. Only remember me, you understand. It will be too late to counsel then, or pray. Okay, so that's an octave, and it follows an A-B-B-A, A-B-B-A rhyme scheme. It's one unit. Okay, you can see how the rhymes continue. Everything there is either A or and, okay, for that entire thing. Following that is the sestet. Yet, if you should forget me for a while, and afterwards remember, do not grieve. For if the darkness and corruption leave a vestige of the thoughts I once had, better by far you should forget and smile, than that you should remember and be sad. Okay, so that's a separate rhyme scheme. This one, as you can see, goes, where am I now, yeah? C, D, C, E, no, C, D, C, C, I know, it's weird, yeah? What is that? C, D, E, E, F, C, F. Different rhymes, okay? And that's pretty standard for a Petrarchan sonnet. You get one octave, which takes a certain form, and then you get the sestet, which takes a different form. The change there, as I think is probably fairly obvious, is that she's changing her mind about how she wants her dead lover to remember her, or not to remember her in the case of the sestet. We'll talk about remember in more detail later. I just wanted to talk about structure. For now then, have a look at this. This is Sonnet 116, Let Me Not to the Marriage of True Minds, and it is a Shakespearean sonnet. So it's going to be in quatrains. Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not love, which alters when it alteration finds, or bends with the remover to remove. A, B, A, B. Then another quatrain. Oh no, it is an ever-fixed mark that looks on tempests and is never shaken. It is the star to every wandering bark, whose worth's unknown, although his height be taken. C, D, C, D, mark shaken, bark taken. Love's not time's fool, though rosy lips and cheeks within his bending sickle's compass come. Love alters not with his brief hours and weeks, but bears it out, even to the edge of doom. E, F, yeah? And then proved and loved, G, G, at the end. When we come to talk about Sonnet 116 properly, I promise I will explain what all of that means. It is hard, it's meant to be hard. We'll also talk about the fact that those rhymes are half rhymes in some cases, although they might not have been when Shakespeare read them himself. But I wanted you to see here today how the sonnet form, 14 lines long, with one of two possible rhyme schemes, or in the case of the Petrarchan, a sort of a rhyme structure that can change within the scheme, but within Shakespeare, pretty consistently, the three quatrains and the couplet. Because if you get an unseen poem that's 14 lines long, and your first line says, such and such a poem is a sonnet, well, that's a great start. It's also really the only sort of form you need to be able to recognise. Like, do not go gentle into that good night, which is in this anthology, is a villanelle. You don't need to be able to recognise a villanelle. I don't know how to recognise a villanelle, that's fine. But a sonnet is something you should probably know. Alright.